Alright, well, today's video looks like Boeing got away with it. And I have to give you guys some prior context about this case, just because there's a lot to it. But essentially, Boeing for the past, past year, 2 years, has been under a lot of heavy scrutiny due to a lot of different reasons. But I'll break it down to 4 big ones, okay? So, there was 2 planes that crashed. There was the one called the Lion Air Flight 610 in Indonesia, so that crashed in October of 2018, and not too long after that there was Ethiopian Flight 302, which crashed in March of 2019, which also had about a combined deaths that's about 349 people more or less, and a lot of it was tied to the 737 MAX, which had a lot of different issues such as like flight controls and all that weren't working properly, and so a lot of people, at least a lot of people, like quality controllers, kind of skipped some steps when it came to making the planes. So they weren't exactly the most well built. So eventually those planes had to actually be grounded for about 2 years before they could go into the air again. So that's one reason. That's 2 cases anyway. And the other 2 cases were 2 whistleblowers ended up magically got taken off the census, is the nice way to put it. And so the first one I have here is Joshua Dean, and so he was a former quality auditor at Spirit Aero Systems, which was a major Boeing contractor, and he actually filed a formal complaint to the FAA in October of 2022, and what he noticed that there was improperly drilled holes in the AFT pressure bulkhead of the 737 MAX, but he ended up dying to a sudden staph infection. And the key point about this case that I actually remember when I looked into it was that he was a very healthy person, so getting a sudden staph infection is a bit suspicious to say the least. And then there's John Barnett, who was also a veteran who worked at Boeing, and he worked at there for about 30 years, and he was a former quality manager, and he filed complaints in 2017 about talking about defective parts, and there was poor practices, safety practices. And then he also warned about stuff coming out about the 737 MAXs, and they ended up, crashing, as you know. And he was actually scheduled for a deposition in March of 2024, part of the lawsuit. However, he died on March 9th with a gunshot wound from the car, and it was said that he put himself on a shirt, to say the least. But it was also said that, he was never going to do that because he was literally going to a court case to talk about the company itself. So that's where we are now. I go into much further detail in my video talking about Boeing, so I highly recommend you go and watch that. It's about 40 minutes long, but it details it goes in depth about every single case around Boeing, because there is a lot to it, but I'm not going to do in this video, so I would suggest you go watch it down below. And there's also other whistleblowers, other people who've spoken out about it, other people who commented on it, and more about the flights themselves, and there's various safety practices. So yeah, take a look at that. That's my shameless self-plug for today. And now on to the meat and potatoes. So after all of that, going down, the Department of Justice, or the DOJ, ended up looking into this case. And so here we're going to go through this article about, what ended up occurring. And so it says here, the U.S. Justice Department said on Friday that it had reached a deal with Boeing that it will allow aircraft maker to avoid prosecution over 2 crashes of its 737 MAX planes that killed 346 people. I think I said 357, so I got that number wrong. The non-prosecution agreement would allow Boeing, a major military contractor and top U.S. exporter, to avoid labeled a felon. The decision means Boeing won't face trial as scheduled next month, as crash victims' family members have urged for years. The Department of Justice met with crash victims' family members last week to discuss the potential deal. In a court filing, the DOJ said it is the government's judgment that the agreement is a fair and just resolution that serves the public interest. A little ironic, but continuing. The agreement guarantees further accountability, substantial benefits from Boeing immediately, while avoiding the uncertainty and litigation risk presented by proceedings to trial. The DOJ said it intends to file a motion to dismiss the case once the agreement in principle is finalized by no later than the end of the week. Under the agreement, Boeing will have to pay or invest more than $1.1 billion. The DOJ said in its filing in federal court in Texas on Friday. That amount includes a $487.2 million criminal fine, though $243.6 million it already paid in an earlier agreement would be credited. It also includes $440.5 million for a new fund for crash victims and $445 million more on compliance, safety, and quality programs. So, depending on how you see this, you might interpret this as a slap on the wrist, and I wouldn't blame you for saying that, because the important part is that it looks like the family members, at least the victims who ended up dealing with this, did not really get thoroughly compensated, which is what we were looking for. Because, whenever you go into court battles, okay, especially against a company as big as Boeing, as you saw, they're a military contractor, so that makes them even bigger than, your average people or your average person. So, first of all, court battles take a very long time to get done. That's why this update took about a year since I even made the videos on Boeing when I was looking into it. So, there's been other updates as well, but I'm just pointing out that court cases take a long time. And also, they're very exhausting, okay? Especially if you've ever seen someone dealing with a defamation case, or somebody dealing with even a justifiable criminal case. Sometimes the system just takes a very long time. It doesn't matter which country you're in, by the way. A lot of court systems take a long time just because you have to pay lawyers, you have to get all your evidence properly. Sometimes you might have a mistrial, sometimes you have to go back and do other stuff. So it's kind of where we are now when it comes to it. So all I'm just trying to say is that when it comes to these cases, you got to keep that in mind, which is why it took so long to, get to this point. And so, yeah, it's very, very sad to take a look at. And so if we go a bit further down in the article that I have here, I do want to go somewhere that kind of caught me off guard here. And it says here that, but families of the crash victims have criticized previous agreements as sweetheart deals for Boeing, called for more accountability from the company, and said its executives should stand trial. In 2022, a former chief technical pilot for Boeing was acquitted on fraud charges tied to the MAX's development. Several of the family's victims issued a statement through their lawyer shortly after the court filing was released criticizing the deal, saying it set a troubling precedent for other larger companies. This kind of prosecution deal is unprecedented and obviously wrong for the deadliest corporate crime in U.S. history. My family will object and hope to convince the court to reject it, said the family's lawyer, Paul Cassell. The Department of Justice said relatives of more than 110 crash victims told the government they support the non-prosecution agreement or support the department's efforts to resolve the case pre-trial more generally, but added that others said they want the U.S. to take Boeing trial and said that they would litigate to dismiss the deal. So, like I just said earlier, it's basically a slap on the wrist, because if I remember correctly from this case as well, I believe some executives also resigned from the company, so to get away from the whole stuff. But I'll double check that in a second. But just the whole point was that you had that, and then now, even then, the 110 crash victims that have told that they support the agreement, this is literally just when you get to a point where you will, it's like I said earlier. You have a long court case. You're still trying to get justice for this stuff that happened. Hold on. Sorry. That was 5-6 years ago. Actually, no. Not 5-6 years. Maybe more like 7 or 8. Yeah. 7-8 years ago, you're still trying to get justice. It's tiring. So that's why some people might be like, yeah, we support it. It was what it is. And it's kind of like what I expected to happen. And so if you keep going down more and more and more and more, if you actually look at the previous deal, it also says here that under that deal, so that was the one from 2021, Boeing agreed to pay $2.51 billion fine to avoid prosecution. That included $243.6 million criminal penalty, a $500 million fund for crash victims' family members, and $1.77 billion for its airline customers. The new fund will be on top of the $500 million that was already established. And I remember at the time too, when I looked at this case, Boeing stocks were in the dumps, especially when one of the whistleblowers mysteriously, died. That was also something that was also very odd. But naturally with stocks, they'll come back and all that stuff, so it is what it is. So, yeah. It's kind of insane to me to think about it. So, I do want to take one more look at the DOJ's official statement on it. And yeah, then we'll go from there. Okay, so if we look at this latest update here, it says the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas, the court has set the case for trial on Monday, June 23rd, 2025 in the second floor courtroom before Judge Reed O'Connor. On May 23rd, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a status reporting notifying the court that the government has reached an agreement in principle with Boeing company on terms of a non-prosecution agreement. The parties are proceeding expeditiously to memorialize the terms into a written agreement. After the agreement is finalized and signed, the government will promptly file, with Boeing's consent, a motion to dismiss without prejudice the pending criminal information pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 48A. The government anticipating filing the motion by no later than March 30th, 2025. The status report, which also includes an overview of the material terms of the agreement, is included below. And also, if you go to the next one, it says on March 17th to file a report that is notifying that the government had a virtual conference on May 16th for the representatives of victims of the crashes of Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. The status report is included below. So, yeah, here we are now. So, it turns out that at the end of the day, despite all this fighting, all of that, it ended up being a very futile attempt, it feels like. And I mean, like, I want you guys to look at this in a contextual sense. Don't just look at it the way that it's like, oh, company got away. Why did they get away? Or why did it seem like they got away? Because, well, one, big contractor. Two, they're also one of the biggest, like, probably out of between them and Airbus, they're the two biggest, like, you know, manufacturers of planes. And if you have that going down, that you're naturally slowing down processes. Now, whether this is ethical or not, I'll leave that up to you. But the whole point is that when you look at this in a full context, it makes a lot more sense as to why, okay, that's why they got off with a slap on the wrist. So yeah, it just makes sense. Yeah, pay a few fines and then you go back to making planes again. The part that really messed me up, like especially, is with the whistleblowers. They were not even like mentioned. But the reason why as well is because, you know, there's technically no direct evidence tying Boeing to them. So, you know, one was a staph infection, the other one was, you know, dead in their car with a bullet in their head. So, take it or leave it. So, yeah, that's the one that messed me up the most. But, yeah, no. And when I was looking into this case as well, the odd stuff that I was finding, there was stuff like pipes were not aligned properly, I believe. There was, like, holes weren't drilled in properly. I'm not going to explain to you, like, planes and stuff, but essentially every part has to be meticulously planned out because one little, you know, part that doesn't line up, and it doesn't end very well. And also, I believe that, especially when it comes to all those planes as well, their flight control systems were also not very good, or didn't function properly, or they're let out too early. And so, when they were looking over the stuff, you saw that, well, naturally, the pilots weren't really well trained on this new software, and then went down. And there was no survivors, by the way. One plane literally crashed straight into the ocean, the other one crashed straight into land. And when you're falling, or at least when the plane's going down, you eventually will hit a point where, like, water is literally like concrete. So that's what happened. And so, yeah. So there's not really much else to say about this case entirely. It ended a bit unexpectedly for me because as someone who was following this case somewhat, okay, where I was really waiting for like a really big update like this one, I was kind of expecting like, hey, maybe they'll pay some more fines, maybe give some compensation to families, and then they'll be due on their way. But this is a bit even less than what I was expecting. Like, they got it completely thrown out for the non-prosecution, which is the part that has me like, oh, it's that bad. But I can't really be mad about it because, you know, it happens all the time. So maybe in the near future there might be a new case that looks into it. But yeah, here we are now. So I believe that's going to be my final update on this entire case. If you want to if you want to learn more about it, I will link you down 2 videos in the description below that will be that go in more depth about it, and even talk about like the plea deals and stuff. But that's really it for me. Yeah, it kind of sucks because, you know, corporations aren't really held accountable to the standard that we believe they should be, and they kind of keep getting away with stuff. So this is just one of them cases, but hopefully, you know, something new comes up. But for the most part, I believe this will be my last video on Boeing in general. So a bit of a sad ending, but it is what it is. So if you enjoy this type of content, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and follow my socials in the description below. And we are going to be streaming tonight, so if you want to come and hang out, you feel free to. I'll be streaming it on maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 hours, or latest 5-6 p.m. Eastern time. So I'll be seeing you guys down there. But that being said, That's it for me today. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.